Hey, it is Rachel. It is the first week of February and our day lengths have officially gone longer than 10 hours. That means we are at the end of the Persephone period, plant growth is resuming, and it was time for me to get this bed planted. Now our temperatures are still in the 20s to 30 degree range Fahrenheit. It's warm today in the 40s, but I know I've still got some cold stretches in front of me. And if you're thinking, that is really cold, nothing is going to germinate, why are you planting? You're right, nothing would germinate in these temperatures. For my normal spring crops that I put in, like carrots or lettuce, I typically would be waiting for the soil to get somewhere around 60 degrees Fahrenheit before I put them in. In my case, we aren't going to hit those temperatures until mid-April, but I don't want to wait that long to get harvests. And that is why one of my favorite things to do is to plan ahead for an early spring bed in the garden. Your cold hardy crops, your carrots, fava beans, mustards, kales, they will survive cold temperatures like we're going to still have for the next few months, as long as they're already established. If you plant them the fall before and let them grow about this big, in my case, that means planting them in roughly mid-September, anywhere from September 10th through maybe early October. When the days drop to 10 hours or less, they kind of go into a form of stasis, they hang tight, and they wait until the sun returns, at which point they resume growth. They will leap back into action as soon as you get 10 hours of daylight, and you will get a much earlier harvest. You do need to protect them from killing temperatures. I just posted a video about a successful experiment that I did to overwinter the carrots that are in this bed and protect them during a cold snap. I'll link that here. It worked well. For my other crops that are in here, like chard, bok choy, or mustard greens, I start those also in early September, and I put them in the greenhouse and keep them there over the winter, and then I transplant them in. You cannot do this with frost tender crops like your tomatoes and peppers, but for anything that can withstand temperatures down to around 20-25 degrees Fahrenheit, I find that this works extremely well. I had planned an early spring bed as part of the garden, and I got my carrots planted last fall, as well as starting transplants to support this. My greenhouse had red mustard ready to go, as well as some purple pak choy. I had fava beans started, some kale, and a mixture of perpetual spinach and red ruby chard. Those transplants have now been sitting outside for a couple of days, hardening off, and they're ready to go in the garden. The trick is I cannot follow my original plan as I had designed it. I'm going to give you a view of the bed now that I've got it planted, and I'm going to briefly talk through the design of it. I had a layout planned last year when I started all of these transplants and when I put the carrots in the ground. Because my experiment to protect things over the winter worked better than I had expected, good problem to have, but I now have quite a few things living in this bed that I had expected to be dead by now, and I had to re-rack the design. I'll spend maybe 20-30 seconds talking about the new design, but mostly I just wanted to show you guys that this does work and that you can get much earlier harvests in the spring if you follow this approach. As I mentioned in my last video, the experiment for this bed of protecting it through our extremely cold snap worked shockingly well, and my carrots are all alive over there. So that's a positive. Because that experiment worked so well, I now have a sort of good problem to have that there's a lot of stuff still in this bed. You can kind of tell I have Scotch curly kale, scarlet kale, some random onions that made it. A pretty healthy stand of arugula. And then interestingly, I had what I thought was a failed experiment last year, trying to do a DIY seed gel with lettuce, and it, in my then opinion, didn't germinate. Turns out it just germinated really slowly. And now I have these little spinaches coming up underneath the remains of that test that I did with the leaves. I want to let that lettuce go ahead and grow. I'm going to try not to touch this part of the bed too much and let these greens just kind of come up on their own. But what I did do around the existing kale, which is a fairly heavy feeder, kale will take a lot of nitrogen out of the soil. To try and balance that out for next year, I'm going to go ahead and take my fava beans that are really ready to be transplanted. But I think what I'm going to do is take these fava beans and intersperse them amongst the kale in the bed, and have them as basically a nitrogen boost for the soil. So when I terminate those at the end of the spring bed, they fix nitrogen in their roots in partnership with some symbiotic bacteria. Those roots will stay in the soil, break down, and add nitrogen back, and hopefully compensate for everything these kale are taking out. Hence this layout. I'm going to tuck the fava beans as close as I can to the kale. I tried to take my light sensitive, prone to bolting greens, like that arugula there or the spinach here, I'm also putting them close to some of these mature kale plants. At the moment, their new baby leaves are itty bitty still, but as our day lengths increase and they start to really leaf out, they'll provide some beneficial shade to the arugula and the spinach, help delay that bolting. And then last but not least, at the end of this bed, candidly, I just kind of put everything else. I have a couple of little kale plants at the moment, there and there. Those will grow up and become large kale plants and shade the other things. I've put them in the middle so they can tuck under the high point of these arches. And then all around them, I have put in a mixture of my giant red mustard and my purple bok choy. Those are my two other main plants for this bed. Pretty happy with this layout, and I'm gonna go ahead and get this into the ground. There is the finished, planted, admittedly very densely planted, early spring bed. And finally, with a little bit of light rabbit protection. That's it. I hope that was helpful. Let me know if you have any questions. I do highly recommend this, and I personally am excited to be getting things back in the ground and to feel like I have a proper garden going again. I hope everybody else is enjoying the season. Leave questions below and I will answer them as best as I can. Otherwise, until next time, thanks.